Wildfire by Carol Jefferson. Dear reader, I have one big fear that has haunted me my entire life. Fire. I have always been wary of campfires, barbecues, and sparklers on the 4th of July. Even fires in fireplaces make me nervous. I still have to take a deep breath before I turn on the gas fireplace at my parents' house, and it's controlled by a switch. For some reason, despite all the evidence to the contrary, I have this nagging fear that my house is going to catch on fire. So I am overly careful when I burn candles. I check to make sure I turn off the oven several times before I go to bed. I keep a fire extinguisher nearby whenever I'm in the kitchen. I've even been known to come home from work midday, just to make sure I unplugged my automatic shutoff iron. I understand that it's really irrational and that but that's the thing about fear. You can't turn it off, even when you know it's silly. This is why writing Sadie's latest mystery was so much fun for me. The opening scene of Wildfire, where the old Silver Peak School house burns to the ground, is pretty much my worst nightmare. This made it kind of fun to have Sadie investigate the old fire, especially since, in this story, the answer has real modern-day consequences. It was the kind of mystery where I could understand the motivation to find answers. As Sadie comes closer to finding out the solution, I felt just slightly less worried about my own fears. In any case, I hope the story is as much fun for you to read as it was for me to write. Best wishes, Elizabeth Adams, writing as Carol Jefferson. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. It had started with just a spark, just one little flame, and now the whole place was engulfed. Flames licked at the side walls and charred the front doors. Tongues of fire raced up the bell tower, leaping high into the night sky. The roof was almost entirely lit up now. He heard a low rumbling, and then a deafening boom as something inside the schoolhouse exploded, sending flames shooting out of the blown out windows. The lights in one of the houses across the road flicked on, and he stepped back further into the shadows. He should go, get far away from here, before anyone saw him. But he couldn't quite pull away from the spectacle. He had never seen anything like it. The unbearable heat coming off in waves. The ethereal glow of flames cast on the trees and the houses across the way. The sound, like a roaring lion, like a locomotive. The very air shimmered. It was horrible. And it was somehow strangely, shockingly beautiful. From somewhere down the road, he heard sirens. He needed to get out of there. He moved off, stepping into the cover of... The cover of... The trees. It was just a short distance through the woods that bordered the old property. Just a few minutes, and then he'd be gone, with nothing to tie him to any of this. Still, he hesitated, casting one last look back at the burning schoolhouse, taking it all in, and then he turned and disappeared into the woods. No one must ever find out what he'd done. Sadie Spears turned up her collar against the cold spring rain and closed the door. "Come on, Hank." Her golden retriever, who had stopped to sniff a pine cone, bounded after her, racing toward the house. Sadie moved a bit slower, picking her way carefully across the soggy yard toward the front door. Her work boots were caked with mud from Milo Henderson's horse farm, and she tried to keep her balance as another gust of wind blew. For April, it sure felt like winter. The forecasters had called for rain mixed with sleet tonight, and it looked like they were right about it. It had been sunny and in the high 60s over the weekend. But that was life in Colorado, she supposed. You never knew what the weather was going to do. Hank was pawing at the door when Sadie reached it. She unlocked the door and stepped inside gratefully. Now that she'd checked on the horses and taken Hank for a walk, all she wanted to do was take a hot shower and settle in with a good book for the evening. She pulled off her boots and peeled away her wet coat and hung it in the closet by the door. Clarabelle had been there today. The whole house smelled like lemon and fresh pine soaps the housekeeper used. Sadie inhaled deeply and then walked into the vaulted living room, eyeing the tall stone fireplace. It was the perfect night for a fire. First, she jumped. Her cell phone was ringing. Where did she? Oh, yes. She rushed back to the coat closet and pulled it out of the pocket of her jacket. It was Virginia Radcliffe calling. Hello, Sadie said. Sadie had always liked Virginia, a teacher at the high school who had taken over Sadie's history classes when Sadie retired. They had been friendly through the years, and when Virginia asked Sadie if she had been interested in helping her with a presentation for the big spring fundraiser at the high school, Sadie had been glad to help. As part of a gala event that would raise money to update the school's library, Sadie and Virginia would give a short multimedia presentation on the history of Silver Peak's first schoolhouse, a historic one-room structure that dated back to the early days of the mining town's boom years. Though the schoolhouse had burned down in 1965, when Sadie was still a child, it was a key piece of Silver Peak's history, and their presentation at the fundraiser next week would be one of several that traced the history of education in their beloved small town. Sadie had spent many happy hours at the Historical Society and Library researching the old schoolhouse and had found some neat old photos and accounts of its early days. Sadie, Virginia's voice sounded a bit muffled, like she had been speaking into a headset, but Sadie could still hear the excitement in her voice, as well as some soft music playing in the background. Virginia, how are you? Where are you? What's going on? I'm in my car. There was a shrill noise, and then Virginia was back on the line. There, is that better? I adjusted the headset. Much better. Oh, Sadie. Oh, good. Sadie, you'll never believe what I found. Oh? In their research in the old schoolhouse, they had uncovered some old rumors and suspicions about the schoolhouse fire. Though the blaze was determined to be an accident, the result of dated and shady electrical work, Virginia had come across some old newspaper articles that suggested that things might not have been so simple. Virginia had become fascinated by the idea that the fire had been set on purpose and had spent much of the past few weeks digging through old town records looking for clues to see if she could find any truth to the rumors. Sadie had been interested to see her conclusions, but she had been left doing the bulk of the work on the history of the schoolhouse itself. Sadie didn't mind. History was her passion, and as a former high school teacher, she could think of a few subjects more fascinating. It's true, Virginia continued. The fire was definitely not an accident. I know who... The reception cut out. As it often did in these twisty mountain roads. Virginia? There was some static, and then Virginia was back on the line. Anyway, I'll tell you more when I get there. I should be there in just a few minutes. You're coming here? Is that okay? I'm sorry. I shouldn't have assumed. I just thought Sadie was used to the bad cell reception out here, but still felt herself growing frustrated. No, that's great, Sadie said. Of course you're welcome. I just wanted to make sure I was hearing you right. I'm home, and I'm anxious to hear what you found. It's unbelievable, Sadie. All this time, it was right there, and no one thought to look for it. As she spoke, Virginia's voice lost the excitement Sadie had heard earlier, and something like hesitation entered. Is everything okay? Yeah, it's fine. It's just. Sadie couldn't tell if the line had cut out again or if Virginia had just hesitated again. This car was behind me. This car has been behind me the whole way. It's weird. Sadie knew seeing the same car behind you for miles was usually nothing to worry about on these old mountain roads. They were generally limited to one lane in either direction, and there weren't a lot of places to turn off. But Virginia knew that too. Where are you? I was working in my classroom at the school, and then I figured out who'd set the fire. I came straight to the car and set off for your house. I'm close now, out on Country Rock Road. Sadie heard the hum of Virginia's windshield wipers swishing across the smooth glass. She was surprised to hear that Virginia had been in her classroom at the school this late. She had a husband and 2 small boys at home. Something about this car behind me is weird. It's far enough back that I can't really see it, but it slows down when I slow, and it has made every turn I've made. Again, under the circumstances, this wouldn't seem strange at all. Of course, the car behind her would slow down whenever Virginia did. She was no doubt braking for the curves in the road and stop signs, and other drivers would need to brake for the same reasons. But if Virginia was nervous, Sadie had a reason to be as well. Maybe you should pull over and see if they pass, Sadie suggested. Good idea. Hang on, Virginia said. And Sadie heard the click of her blinker. That's weird. What's weird? What? The other car slowed down. Okay, now it's pulling over too. Sadie's heart started racing. Was someone following Virginia to her house? Why? What kind of car is it? I can't really tell. It's far enough back that it just looks like a sedan of some kind in some dark color. I don't recognize it, but it just kind of looks like any other car. Where on Country Rock Road are you? I just passed Mickelson's garage. Now I'm just before that big curve. You're close then. She wasn't more than a couple of miles from Sadie's ranch house. Why don't you get back on the road and come here, and we'll see if that car follows you. Sadie didn't know what she would do if the car did follow Virginia to her house, but they'd cross that bridge when they got there. Okay, I'm pulling out now. Again, Sadie heard the click of the blinker, and then the quiet hum of the car moving. Is the other car coming too? It's hard to tell. Virginia's voice trailed off. Oh yes, now it's pulling out onto the road too. Again too. The line went fuzzy. This is really weird. The line cut out again. Sadie held her breath. Static again, and then, getting closer to me. I don't know what's going on. I can't. The line cut out again. Sadie wanted to throw her phone across the room, and then Virginia came back on. About the fire. Here, Sadie, write this down. I tracked down the old police Sadie scrambled to get a pen and paper. But just as she was writing, the line cut out. Old police what? The Wilk? Sadie copying it down. Even as Virginia's voice disappeared again. 5100. The line went dead again, but this time it came back quickly, and she heard Virginia yell, "He's coming at me!" And then all she heard was the screech of tires and metal scraping against metal. "Virginia!" Sadie yelled into the phone, but the only answer was a loud thud and the sound of glass shattering. "Virginia, are you okay?" Sadie shouted again, but there was only silence, and then the line went dead.